Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel deep into the endless wilderness of British Columbia, through forgotten logging roads, isolated mountain valleys, and small towns surrounded by forests so vast that help does not reach for miles. Hidden within this rugged landscape are 7 of the most terrifying encounters ever reported, each one darker, stranger, and more disturbing than the last. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of British Columbia's wilderness, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Daniel Carter, and this happened in the fall of 2018 when I went on a remote camping trip in the mountains of British Columbia with my older brother Marcus and our friend Tyler. Marcus had always loved wilderness survival. His dream was to hike through the deeper parts of the Canadian forests where few people ever go. Tyler and I were less enthusiastic, but Marcus insisted this trip would be unforgettable. Looking back now, he was right. We drove nearly 6 hours along a series of dirt logging roads before finally reaching a narrow clearing beside a river. Towering pine trees surrounded us on all sides, stretching so high they blocked most of the sky. The forest felt ancient, not peaceful, just old. Marcus loved it immediately. "This is perfect," he said, stepping out of the truck. Tyler laughed nervously. "Perfect for what? Getting eaten?" Marcus shrugged. "Relax. Nothing out here except animals." At the time, that seemed reasonable. But later that night, something began moving in the darkness around our campfire. And it definitely wasn't an animal. We spent the first hour setting up our camp. Marcus built the fire while Tyler and I pitched the tents. The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, and the forest darkened much faster than I expected. By the time we finished dinner, the world beyond the firelight had become completely black. That was the first moment I felt uneasy. The woods were too quiet. Normally, forests are filled with sounds, crickets, wind, distant animals. But that night there was almost nothing. Tyler noticed it too. "Do you hear that?" he asked quietly. "Hear what?" Marcus said. "Exactly," Tyler replied. Marcus just laughed and tossed another log onto the fire. "You guys watch too many horror movies." Maybe he was right. But about 20 minutes later, something heavy moved somewhere in the trees behind us. A branch snapped loudly. All 3 of us turned toward the sound. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and shined it into the woods. The beam revealed nothing but endless rows of black tree trunks. But something had definitely been there. And it was big. Marcus kept the flashlight pointed into the trees for nearly 30 seconds, slowly sweeping the beam across the forest. The light slid over thick trunks, tangled branches, and patches of moss that glowed pale in the beam. But there was no animal. No movement. Nothing. Tyler shifted closer to the fire. "Probably a deer," Marcus said casually, lowering the flashlight. But the confidence in his voice felt forced. I stared into the darkness where the branch had snapped. The forest looked normal again, but something about it felt wrong. Like we had interrupted something that had been quietly watching us. Marcus sat back down and grabbed a stick to poke the fire. The flames crackled loudly. For a few minutes, we tried to go back to normal conversation. Tyler talked about his job back in Vancouver, and Marcus joked about how city people always get nervous in the woods. Then it happened again. Another sound. This time, much closer. Something heavy stepped slowly through the trees just beyond the edge of the firelight. The 3 of us froze instantly. This wasn't the quick rustling sound of an animal running through brush. Whatever was out there was moving slowly, deliberately. Step, then silence. Another step. Tyler whispered, "That's not a deer." Marcus stood up again and grabbed the flashlight, his expression suddenly serious. "Stay here," he said. He took a few cautious steps toward the trees and aimed the beam directly where the sound had come from. For a moment, nothing appeared. Then the light caught something strange. Two reflective shapes between the trees. Eyes, but they were too high off the ground. Marcus stopped walking. "How tall do you think a deer is?" Tyler whispered beside me. The eyes didn't move. They just stared back at us from the darkness. Marcus slowly raised his voice. "Hey." The forest remained silent. Then suddenly the eyes disappeared, and something massive crashed through the trees farther away, retreating into the wilderness. But none of us felt relieved, because whatever it was, it had been standing upright. For several seconds, none of us spoke. The crashing sound of whatever had run through the forest slowly faded into the distance, leaving only the crackling fire and the quiet flow of the river beside our camp. Tyler was the first to break the silence. That thing, those eyes were like 7 feet off the ground. Marcus didn't answer right away. He kept staring into the woods, gripping the flashlight tightly. "Maybe it was standing on something," he finally said, though he didn't sound convinced. I stood up and walked closer to the fire. Suddenly, the warmth of the flames felt like the only safe place in the world. "Should we pack up and leave?" I asked. Marcus shook his head immediately. "No way. It's probably just a bear." But even as he said the words, he kept scanning the forest. Tyler pointed nervously toward the dark tree line. Then why didn't it run when we first saw it? None of us had an answer. And about 15 minutes later, we heard the slow footsteps again. But this time, they were circling us. The sound was unmistakable now. Something large was walking slowly through the forest, just beyond the reach of our campfire's light. Every few seconds, we heard branches snapping softly under its weight. Step, pause, step. It moved from one side of our camp to the other, always staying just far enough away that we couldn't see it clearly. Tyler leaned close to me and whispered, "Animals don't stalk people like this." Marcus tried to stay calm. "Bears do sometimes," he said. But even he didn't sound confident anymore. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Complete silence swallowed the forest again. Then, from somewhere behind us, we heard something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A low breathing sound, slow, deep. Too deep for any animal I'd ever heard. Marcus turned the flashlight toward the darkness behind our tents. For a second, the beam showed nothing. Then we noticed something horrifying. The trees behind us were moving slightly, like something huge was standing between them. Marcus slowly stepped backward toward the fire, never taking his eyes off the darkness behind the tents. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in his hand, revealing only tree trunks and thick brush. But something was definitely there. The branches shifted again, slowly bending as if something large was pushing through them without actually stepping forward. Tyler whispered, "Do you see it?" "I see something," Marcus replied quietly. The fire cracked loudly behind us, throwing long shadows across the campsite. For a brief moment, the flames flared higher, and that was when I saw it. A tall silhouette moved between the trees. It wasn't clear enough to see details, but its shape was unmistakably wrong. It looked too tall and far too thin. The figure paused. Then it leaned slightly to one side, as if trying to look at us around the trunk of a tree. I felt my stomach drop. Whatever was standing out there, it was watching us, and it was trying not to be seen. Did that thing just move? Tyler whispered. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He slowly adjusted the flashlight, trying to catch the figure in the beam again. But the light only revealed empty forest. The silhouette was gone. For a few seconds, none of us breathed. Then suddenly something heavy slammed into the trees to our left. Crack! A thick branch snapped loudly, echoing through the forest. Tyler jumped back so fast that he nearly fell over the cooler. "Okay, that's it," he said. "We're leaving." Marcus finally lowered the flashlight, his expression pale. I had never seen my brother look scared before. But now the confidence he carried earlier that evening was completely gone. "Pack the gear," he said quietly. We began throwing our equipment into the truck as fast as we could. Sleeping bags, backpacks, cooking gear. None of it was organized anymore. While we worked, I kept glancing toward the tree line. And once, just once, I swear I saw that tall shape again. Standing perfectly still between two trees, watching us leave. Within minutes, our peaceful campsite had turned into complete chaos. Backpacks were half-zipped, gear was thrown randomly into the truck bed, and none of us cared about leaving things behind. The only thing we wanted was distance. Marcus jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine while Tyler and I climbed in as quickly as possible. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness of the clearing, illuminating the forest ahead. For a moment, everything looked normal again. Tall trees, thick brush, nothing moving. Marcus shifted the truck into reverse. As the vehicle slowly backed up, the headlights swept across the edge of the forest. And that was when we finally saw it clearly. Standing about 30 feet away between two massive trees was a tall, thin figure. It looked almost human, but its proportions were wrong. Its arms were far too long. Its body was unnaturally narrow, and its head tilted slightly to one side as it watched us. Then the creature took one slow step toward the truck. Marcus slammed the truck into drive. The truck roared forward down the dirt logging road, tires throwing gravel behind us as Marcus pushed the accelerator as hard as he could. None of us spoke for nearly a full minute. The forest rushed past us in a blur of dark shapes and headlights. Finally, Tyler turned around in his seat, staring through the rear window. "Is it following us?" I asked quietly. He kept looking for several seconds before slowly shaking his head. "No, I don't see anything." Marcus didn't slow down for almost 20 minutes. By the time we reached the main highway, all three of us were completely silent. Eventually, Tyler spoke again. "Did you guys see how tall that thing was?" Marcus nodded slowly. "At least 8 feet." I looked back at the endless black forest disappearing behind us. The strange part is, we never heard it chase us. It never ran after the truck. It simply watched us leave. And sometimes I still wonder if that thing wasn't hunting us at all. Maybe it was just curious. My name is Caleb Turner, and this happened during the summer of 2019 when I was working as a seasonal wildlife photographer in the remote wilderness of British Columbia. My job required me to spend weeks at a time deep in the mountains documenting animal activity for conservation projects. Most of the time, I worked alone, hiking through areas where the nearest town was sometimes over 100 miles away. I loved the isolation. At least, I thought I did. One evening after a long day photographing black bears near a remote valley, I realized I had miscalculated the time. The sun was already sinking behind the mountains, and the trail back to my vehicle was nearly 10 miles away. Night would arrive long before I made it. Luckily, I remembered something. Earlier that day while hiking, I had passed an old ranger station hidden deep in the forest. It looked abandoned, but it still had a roof and walls. For one night, that was more than enough. What I didn't realize then was that the station wasn't actually empty. By the time I reached the ranger station, darkness had already begun creeping through the forest. The building stood alone in a small clearing surrounded by towering cedar trees. It was an old wooden structure, probably built decades ago, with faded green paint peeling from the walls. At first glance, it looked completely abandoned. One of the front windows was cracked, and the wooden porch sagged slightly under its own weight. A rusty sign beside the door still read, "Forest Service Station." I climbed the porch steps carefully and pushed the door. It creaked open slowly. Inside, the air smelled old and dusty, like a place that hadn't been visited in years. There was a small desk, a broken chair, and a metal stove in the corner. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the floorboards groaned quietly under my boots. Perfect shelter for the night. I set my backpack down and began preparing my sleeping bag. That's when I noticed something strange. There were fresh, muddy footprints on the wooden floor. And they definitely weren't mine. I stood there for several seconds, staring down at the footprints, trying to convince myself they weren't what they looked like. They were clearly fresh. Dark, wet mud had been tracked across the wooden floorboards, forming a line that stretched from the front door toward the back of the cabin. The prints were large too, much larger than my own boots. For a moment, I wondered if another hiker had arrived before me. But that didn't explain something. The door had been completely closed when I reached the station. If someone had walked in recently, I would have seen them on the trail or heard them moving around inside. I slowly looked around the room again. The cabin was small, just one main room and a narrow hallway that led toward what looked like a storage area in the back. Everything appeared still, silent. I crouched down and studied the footprints more closely. They were deep, like whoever made them had been carrying something heavy. And they only went one direction, toward the back hallway. I told myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe another ranger used the station occasionally. Maybe someone had come through earlier that day and left the door closed behind them. Still, something about the footprints bothered me. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly walked toward the narrow hallway at the back of the cabin. The beam of light slid across the walls as I moved forward. The hallway was barely wide enough for one person, with rough wooden boards on both sides and a low ceiling above. The footprints continued straight down the hallway, step after step, but halfway down, they suddenly stopped. I shined the flashlight directly at the spot where the final print ended. There was nothing there. No door, no window, just a blank wooden wall. I frowned and stepped closer. That's when I heard it. A quiet sound coming from somewhere inside the wall. A slow, scratching noise, like someone gently dragging their fingers along the wood from the other side. At first, I thought I had imagined it. The sound was so faint that for a moment I convinced myself it was just the old building settling in the cool night air. But then it came again, a slow, dragging scratch, right behind the wooden wall in front of me. I froze in the narrow hallway, holding the flashlight tightly. The beam shook slightly as I stared at the boards. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded strangely small inside the old station. For several seconds, there was no response. Then the scratching stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse. I stepped closer to the wall, slowly reaching out to press my hand against the wood. The surface felt cold and rough beneath my fingers. And that's when I realized something unsettling. The wall sounded hollow when I tapped it lightly. There was empty space behind it. Before I could think about that any longer, something suddenly knocked twice from the other side. 2 slow, deliberate taps. Knock, knock. I jerked my hand away from the wall immediately. There was no mistaking it this time. Something had knocked from the other side. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring at the boards, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Maybe there was an animal trapped inside the wall, a raccoon or a squirrel. That had to be it. Trying to calm myself, I knocked back lightly. "Hey, you stuck in there?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then the response came. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. My stomach tightened instantly. Animals don't knock back. I took a step backward, suddenly feeling very aware of how far away the nearest town was. Then something even stranger happened. The wood in the center of the wall shifted slightly, as if something behind it had leaned against the boards, and through a thin crack between 2 planks. I swear I saw something moving. Not an animal. It looked like a human eye staring out at me. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. An eye, a human eye, staring through the crack in the wooden wall. I stumbled backward in the hallway, nearly dropping the flashlight. The beam shook wildly across the walls as my heart started pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice suddenly much louder. The eye disappeared instantly. The crack in the wall showed nothing but darkness again. But I knew what I had seen. Someone was inside the wall. I quickly backed away from the hallway and returned to the main room of the station, trying to think clearly. The building was old, but there had to be some kind of hidden crawl space or storage area behind the walls. Maybe a maintenance tunnel. But the idea of someone hiding inside it, watching me through the boards, made my skin crawl. Then I heard something new. The slow sound of wood creaking above me, like someone shifting their weight in the ceiling. I slowly raised the flashlight toward the ceiling. The ranger station had a low attic space above the main room, and several thin wooden beams ran across the roof. For a few seconds, everything looked normal. Then I noticed something disturbing. Dust was falling slowly from between the boards overhead. Not drifting, falling, as if something up there had just moved. I held my breath and listened carefully. Creak. The sound came again, a slow shift of weight directly above my head. Someone was definitely up there. I backed toward the door, keeping the flashlight aimed at the ceiling. "Look, I'm just staying here for the night," I called out nervously. My voice echoed through the empty cabin. "You can come down. I'm not going to hurt you." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the creaking stopped. The silence lasted only a moment, because the next sound came from somewhere much closer, directly behind me. The front door, slowly beginning to close on its own. The slow creak of the front door made my entire body tense. I turned around instantly, shining the flashlight toward the entrance. The heavy wooden door was moving inch by inch, swinging inward as if someone outside had gently pushed it. But when the beam reached the doorway, there was no one there. Just the empty darkness of the forest. A cold wave of fear ran through me. Because if someone had closed the door, they were either incredibly quiet or they were already inside, behind me. I quickly stepped away from the entrance, keeping my back toward the wall so I could see the entire room. The ranger station suddenly felt much smaller, much more claustrophobic. And then I heard it, a soft thump above the ceiling again. But this time, it was followed by another sound, a slow sliding noise, moving across the attic floor directly over my head. Whatever had been watching me through the wall earlier, it was now crawling through the ceiling, and it was following me. At that point, survival instincts finally kicked in. I didn't care about shelter anymore. I didn't care about the long hike back to my truck in complete darkness. I grabbed my backpack and rushed toward the door. The moment I stepped outside, the cold night air hit my face like a shock. The forest was silent, the tall cedar trees standing motionless around the clearing. For a brief moment, I almost felt relief. Then something moved inside the cabin. Through the open doorway behind me, I heard a sudden heavy thud from the attic above, followed by the sound of wood cracking. I didn't wait to see what came down. I ran straight into the forest, using my flashlight to follow the trail back toward the road. I kept running for nearly an hour before I finally stopped and to catch my breath. When I looked back toward the direction of the ranger station, the trees swallowed everything. I never saw whoever or whatever was inside that building. But one thing still haunts me. Those footprints on the floor had only gone into the hallway, not out. My name is Lena Marsh, and this happened during a summer solo hike in Kootenay Pass, deep in the heart of British Columbia's mountains, in 2020. I've been hiking alone for years, documenting trails for a local wilderness blog. Usually, I loved the quiet isolation, just me, my backpack, and the sounds of the forest. But that day, something felt off the moment I stepped onto the trail. The sky was gray and overcast, even though the forecast had predicted clear weather. Mist clung to the mountain ridges, and the air felt unnaturally cold for early July. About 4 hours into the hike, I came across a small, worn path veering off the main trail. Curiosity got the better of me. I followed it, thinking it might lead to a scenic overlook. The path quickly narrowed, trees pressing close on either side, and the fog thickened. I should have turned back. Instead, I pressed on. And that's when I realized I hadn't seen another human all day. And I wouldn't for the rest of the evening. The trail became increasingly difficult. Roots twisted across the path, and jagged rocks made footing precarious. Every step I took echoed strangely through the thick fog, though I was alone. About 30 minutes later, I reached a small clearing. I thought it would offer a view, but the fog was so dense that I could barely see 10 feet ahead. That's when I heard the first sound. It was faint, a snapping of a branch, slow, deliberate, coming from the tree line to my right. I froze, straining to see through the mist. Nothing moved, just the faint sway of branches in the cold breeze. I convinced myself it was likely an animal. A deer, perhaps, or a stray coyote. I adjusted my backpack, trying to keep calm, and continued along the path. Then, a voice, soft, almost a whisper, called my name. Lena. I spun around, but the clearing was empty. And at that moment, I realized the trail I had been following had vanished behind me. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my shaking hands. The whisper had sounded so close, almost as if someone was standing just beyond the fog, watching me. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small and fragile in the vast, misty forest. There was no reply, only the soft rustling of pine needles as the cold wind passed through the trees. I decided I needed to find my way back to the main trail. I spun around, looking for any landmark that might guide me. But the fog was relentless. Every tree looked the same, every shadow stretched endlessly, hiding unknown shapes. Then I noticed something disturbing. Footprints, barely visible in the mud, leading deeper into the forest. They weren't mine. They were too large, and the spacing between them was uneven, like whoever or whatever was walking was limping slightly. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn around, I felt an irresistible pull to follow them. Curiosity, or fear, I wasn't sure which. I took my first cautious step toward the footprints. Each step deeper into the forest made the fog heavier. Shapes seemed to move just beyond my vision, branches bending, shadows shifting. But whenever I focused, nothing was there. My heart pounded in my chest with every sound. The footprints continued, winding through a narrow gully filled with moss-covered rocks. I could hear water trickling nearby, and the echo made every footstep sound amplified, like someone or something was following me. I stopped for a moment and shined my flashlight along the path. The beam cut through the mist, illuminating the wet leaves and tree trunks, but revealed nothing else. The prints, however, were still there, leading further up the slope. Then I saw it, or rather, felt it, a presence. Something cold and deliberate pressed against the back of my neck. I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly, but the gully was empty. A low, gravelly voice whispered again, my name. Lena. And this time it was closer, too close. I realized I wasn't alone in the forest. I stumbled backward, heart hammering in my chest. The voice had been so close, so impossibly near that I could feel the cold air brush against my neck. My flashlight beam trembled as I scanned the fog around me. Nothing. Just twisted tree trunks, wet leaves, and the oppressive mist pressing in from every side. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had followed the trail, maybe it was another hiker lost like me. But something in the air told me otherwise. It wasn't human. I forced myself to focus on the footprints ahead. They hadn't stopped. Each print seemed to sink slightly deeper into the mud, as if the weight of the figure pressing into the ground grew heavier with every step. I swallowed my fear and took another step forward. The fog seemed to thicken with each movement, wrapping around me like living tendrils. Then, a sound cracked through the silence, a dry snapping of branches, but coming from all directions at once. I realized then that the forest was no longer empty. I froze in place, gripping my flashlight so tightly my knuckles turned white. The snapping continued, slow, deliberate, moving around me, but I could see nothing. The fog swallowed every shape, and the trail behind me was already gone. I was trapped. My instincts screamed at me to run. Every horror story I had ever heard about people vanishing in these mountains replayed in my mind. But the footprints called to me, an almost magnetic pull that I couldn't resist. I took a hesitant step forward. The footprints led toward a stand of trees where the fog was thickest. I could barely make out the twisted shapes of the trunks, their shadows stretching across the mud like fingers. Then I saw something moving in the mist. A figure, tall, thin, and impossibly still. Its head tilted unnaturally, watching me. It wasn't running. It wasn't hiding. It was waiting. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. And then, the figure disappeared. I tried to convince myself the figure was a trick of the fog, but my gut knew better. My flashlight's beam trembled across the twisted trees, but there was nothing there. The forest felt alive in a way that made every sound seem deliberate. Every shadow, a predator. The footprints continued ahead, vanishing into a denser patch of mist that seemed to swallow light. I hesitated at the edge, the cold pressing into my bones, but some part of me knew I couldn't turn back. Step by step, I moved forward. The mist thickened until I could barely see the ground beneath my feet. The air grew colder, and I realized my breath was forming small clouds in front of me. Then I heard it. A whisper, softer than before, but unmistakable. Lena. This time, it wasn't coming from behind or ahead. It was everywhere at once, surrounding me in the fog. I froze, realizing that whatever had been following me had closed in completely. Panic surged through me. I spun around, trying to find the path back, but the trail had vanished. The fog now obscured every landmark. Every tree looked identical, stretching endlessly in every direction. Then I heard movement close by. Soft, almost silent, like someone or something was sliding through the underbrush. My flashlight caught glimpses of shadows, but nothing fully formed. I stumbled over roots and rocks, heart racing. Every step I took seemed to echo unnaturally, magnifying my fear. The whispers came again, this time faster and overlapping, like multiple voices calling my name at once. I ducked behind a tree, pressing my back against its bark, trying to steady my breathing. My hands shook violently, flashlight beam cutting through the fog like a fragile lifeline. And then I saw it. Not the tall figure from before, but dozens of shapes, moving shadows in the mist, circling me silently. Their eyes glimmered faintly in the dim light, reflecting back my own terror. I realized then I had walked straight into the heart of whatever was hunting me. I realized I had no choice but to run. My legs felt like lead, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The flashlight trembled wildly, illuminating twisted roots and fallen branches that threatened to trip me at every step. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a low, almost imperceptible rustling in the mist. The shadows followed, gliding between the trees, never fully visible, never fully gone. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Every step I took seemed to echo through the forest like a warning. Then I saw it, a faint glow in the distance. At first, I thought it was moonlight breaking through the fog. But as I drew closer, I realized it was my backpack lying on the edge of the main trail. Relief washed over me for a moment. I grabbed it, turning to run the rest of the way back to the parking area. But something made me stop. The shadows had gathered at the edge of the clearing, waiting. And one of them stepped forward. I sprinted down the trail, heart hammering, fog swirling around me like living fingers. The shadows stayed at the edge of my vision, never fully approaching, but never leaving either. Every sound, a branch snapping, a rock shifting, made me jump. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the parking area emerge through the mist. My truck was there, headlights off, a beacon of safety. I bolted toward it, throwing my backpack inside and slamming the door. The engine roared to life, and I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town. When I looked back, the foggy mountains of Kootenai Pass loomed silently, hiding all traces of the shadows that had pursued me. I never returned to that trail. Even now, I check the weather and fog reports before hiking alone. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the trees near my home, I hear a faint whisper of my name, carried on the breeze, reminding me that whatever followed me that day is still out there. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened during a winter photography trip in northern British Columbia in 2018. I had planned to capture the aurora over the snowy forests and isolated valleys. So I drove hours into the wilderness, far beyond any main roads. The snow was deep and temperatures were well below freezing. But I loved the solitude. Most of the time, there were no footprints, no signs of human life for miles. Just me and the forest. On the second night, I realized I had miscalculated the daylight. The sun dipped behind the mountains faster than I expected, and I knew I wouldn't make it back to my cabin before dark. Scanning the snowy forest ahead, I thought I saw something unusual. A warm glow through the trees, like a fire or lantern. Curious and desperate for shelter, I trudged toward it. What I found shocked me. A small wooden cabin, perfectly intact, with smoke curling from a chimney. I didn't remember seeing it on the map. And strangely, there were no tracks in the snow leading to it. I approached the cabin cautiously, boots crunching softly in the fresh snow. The glow from the window flickered warmly, casting long shadows across the snow-laden clearing. I assumed someone must be inside, a caretaker or another traveler. I reached the door and rapped gently. No response. I knocked again, a bit louder. Still nothing. Finally, I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I stepped inside and immediately felt the warmth of a fire crackling in a small stone fireplace. The room was rustic but cozy. Wooden furniture, a thick rug, and a kettle steaming over the flames. It was the perfect place to wait out the night. I set my backpack down and looked around. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. That's when I noticed something unsettling. On the small wooden table by the window, there were 3 plates of untouched food, as if someone had been expecting guests. I shivered. I was supposed to be alone. I sat down at one of the chairs near the fireplace, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The warmth of the fire was comforting, but the plates of food made my skin crawl. Who had prepared them? Who had been expecting me? I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe the cabin belonged to a local trapper or ranger who had left the food out for anyone in need. I decided to wait a little while, warm up, and plan my hike back to civilization in the morning. As I moved closer to the window, I noticed something strange outside. The snow around the cabin was pristine, untouched. No footprints leading to or from the cabin. It was as if the place had appeared out of nowhere. A low wind moaned through the forest, rattling the wooden shutters. I turned back to the fireplace, only to notice another oddity. The fire was crackling differently, almost rhythmically, like a heartbeat. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping from the attic above me. I froze. The tapping continued, soft at first, then gradually growing louder, more deliberate. My mind raced. Could it be an animal in the attic? Or someone hiding in the cabin, waiting for me? I grabbed my camera tripod and approached the narrow ladder leading to the attic. Each creaking step made my heart pound faster. I shone my flashlight upward, the beam cutting through the shadows. The attic was small, dusty, and filled with old furniture covered in thick sheets. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. And yet, the tapping persisted. It seemed to be coming from behind one of the old wooden crates stacked against the far wall. I swallowed hard and pulled the crate aside. The floor beneath it was completely bare. Not a trace of movement, not a scratch. The sound stopped suddenly. And then, in the silence, I heard it. The faintest whisper right behind me. My name is Ethan. I spun around so quickly my flashlight swung wildly across the cabin. Nothing. The room was empty. Only the fire crackling in the fireplace and the plates of untouched food. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. I told myself it was the wind, that the whisper, the tapping, was just my imagination. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Every instinct screamed at me that I was not alone. I grabbed my backpack and moved toward the door, planning to leave immediately. As I stepped outside, The cold night air hit me like a shock, and I realized something impossible. The cabin had changed. It wasn't the same. The window I had leaned against earlier was now on the opposite wall. The chimney was crooked, as if it had been reconstructed overnight. And the snow outside, pristine just moments ago, now had dozens of footprints leading away into the forest. None of them were mine. I took a step back, heart hammering, realizing I had walked straight into something far beyond explanation. I hesitated, torn between curiosity and terror. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, yet the footprints drew me in. I took a cautious step toward the forest, flashlight shaking in my grip. The forest swallowed me almost immediately. Snow muffled my steps, yet I could feel eyes, or something watching me, from the shadows between the trees. The footprints continued deeper, twisting around boulders, disappearing into a dense patch of fog that seemed to absorb all sound. Suddenly I heard it, a soft humming, low and melodic, coming from somewhere ahead. I froze, recognizing the tune. It was the same melody my grandmother had hummed to me as a child, a lullaby I hadn't heard in years. But there was no one there. The footprints stopped at a tree with twisted branches, forming almost a natural arch. I shined my light, and the snow beneath it was disturbed in a way that suggested something had emerged from the ground itself. And then I saw movement, slow, deliberate, heading toward me. My pulse was racing as I stood frozen under the twisted arch of the tree. The shadowy figure moved slowly, its shape almost human but distorted, as if the fog itself had formed it. I couldn't see a face, only a dark, shifting mass that seemed to absorb all light. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. Every instinct screamed to turn, yet some dark compulsion urged me forward. The humming continued, now louder, wrapping around me like a cold hand. Step by step, the figure drew closer. I noticed details I didn't want to see. The way it didn't leave footprints, how the air around it seemed to distort and swirl unnaturally. Suddenly, it stopped just a few feet away. The fog thickened around its form, and the humming stopped. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the crunch of my own boots on the snow. Then a whisper drifted through the cold night air. "Why did you come here, Ethan?" Fear finally overrode my hesitation. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a snow-covered root. The figure didn't move, but seemed to lean closer, its form shimmering slightly in the fog, like it was both solid and liquid at the same time. I swung my flashlight toward it, but the beam passed through its shape as if it weren't fully there. The humming resumed, low and insistent, making the hair on my arms stand on end. I realized I couldn't stay. Not here. Not with this thing. My hands shook as I turned to run, pushing through thick snow and fallen branches, trying to retrace the trail back to my truck. Behind me, I could hear movement, not crunching snow, but a soft, gliding sound, following me through the fog. Every time I looked back, the figure wasn't where I expected it to be. By the time I broke through the forest edge, I was gasping, heart pounding, and the cabin was nowhere in sight. I ran blindly through the snow, branches whipping my face, my breath visible in the frigid air. The humming persisted, louder now, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat surrounding me from every direction. I dared not glance behind me again, fearing the figure would be impossibly closer than before. Finally, I saw a faint light through the trees. My truck. Relief hit me like a punch, and I sprinted harder, sliding across icy patches and stumbling over roots. The glimmer of headlights reflected off the snow, guiding me like a lifeline. I threw open the door, yanked my backpack inside, and locked it with trembling hands. My engine roared to life, and I didn't look back. Yet even as I drove away, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Something about the forest that night had changed. Whatever had been there had followed me, or at least left its mark in a way I couldn't explain. And the cabin? I never saw it again. I drove for what felt like hours, the snow and fog behind me gradually fading into darkness. I never returned to the trail. But sometimes, when the wind howls through the pines near my home, I hear it. Soft, melodic humming that chills me to the bone. Even stranger, when I look at my photographs from that trip, there's something I didn't notice before. In the background of almost every image, in the mist just beyond the trees, there's a vague, shadowy figure, sometimes closer, sometimes watching from a distance. It's as if it had been observing me the entire time, documenting me as I documented the forest. I've told friends about it, but they dismiss it as paranoia. Yet I know what I saw and what I felt. That cabin, the footprints, the humming. It wasn't human. I never went back into the northern wilderness alone, and I don't think I ever will. Some things in the forest aren't meant to be found. My name is Mark Sullivan, and this happened during a research trip to Haida, Gwaii in the summer of 2019. I'm a wildlife biologist, and I had been studying wolves in the remote forests of the archipelago. Most of the islands were wild, empty, and breathtaking. An endless stretch of moss-covered trees, fog rolling off the ocean, and the occasional call of a raven or eagle. I set up camp near a small creek deep in the forest, intending to spend a week alone observing the wildlife. The first few nights were peaceful, with only the normal sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the crackle of my campfire, and the distant howl of wolves in the distance. But on the fourth night, the howling changed. It started as a low, mournful sound echoing through the trees. At first, I assumed it was a wolf, but there was something unnatural about the tone, a resonance that made the hair on my arms stand on end. It was deliberate. It was calling my name. I froze by the fire, trying to convince myself it was just the wolves communicating. But the sound was too precise, too familiar. I shone my flashlight toward the tree line, and that's when I saw movement. Shadows shifting unnaturally among the trunks. The howls grew louder, now forming a chorus that seemed almost human, almost intelligent. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I could hear faint whispers in between the howls, voices I couldn't understand, yet somehow felt directed at me. I grabbed my camera and started recording, hoping to document the wolves' behavior. As the night stretched on, the howling circled my campsite, moving closer with every minute. Then I noticed something chilling. The footprints left in the mud around my tent weren't wolf prints. They were too large, too deep, and oddly shaped, like nothing I had ever seen. And they weren't going anywhere. They were surrounding me. The night stretched on, and the howls became almost deafening. I could no longer tell which direction they were coming from. The shadows in the forest shifted constantly, as if the trees themselves were moving, or something moved between them. My mind raced with possibilities. Wolves, bears, or something far stranger. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the clearing. Nothing solid appeared, just shifting shadows and the fog curling over the mossy ground. My heart pounded as I realized the howls were no longer random. They were timed, coordinated, circling my tent. Then I heard the first whisper, clear and deliberate. "Mark." I froze. My name. My voice caught in my throat as the whispers multiplied, echoing between the trunks and across the fog. The shadows seemed to grow darker, closer, converging. I knew instinctively that whatever this was, it was intelligent, and it had been watching me all along. My flashlight flickered as I raised it, and for a moment, I thought I saw a humanoid silhouette among the trees. Fear finally pushed me to move. I grabbed my gear and started toward the narrow path leading out of the clearing, but every step I took was echoed by whispers and the eerie chorus of howls. The footprints around my tent were still there, but now they seemed to stretch unnaturally into the fog, leading in no clear direction. Suddenly, a figure appeared, tall, thin, and impossibly still, partially obscured by fog. Its eyes glimmered faintly, reflecting the firelight, and it tilted its head as if studying me. I froze, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. The figure vanished in an instant, but the howls intensified, coming from every direction at once. I realized then that the forest itself seemed alive, reacting to my presence. I stumbled back to my tent, realizing that I had no choice but to confront the night if I wanted to survive. I could no longer stay in the clearing. My instincts screamed at me to move, but the forest was a maze of fog and shadow. Every step I took, the howls shifted, echoing from unexpected directions. It was as if the forest itself was aware of my movements, responding to my fear. I grabbed my backpack, packed up my camera, and started following the faint trail toward the coastline. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, and the moss underfoot was slick with moisture. I stumbled several times, my flashlight beam catching glimpses of dark shapes flitting between the trees. Then I noticed something even more unsettling. Among the shadows, I could see pairs of glowing eyes. Not wolf eyes, not human, but something in between. They followed me, never moving closer, but never leaving either. I ran faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed endless, yet I couldn't stop. Behind me, the howls rose to a deafening crescendo, as if the shadows themselves were calling my name. The path narrowed as I neared a rocky cliff overlooking the ocean. I could see the moonlight reflecting off the waves below. But the forest around me remained alive with shadowy movement. The howling intensified, echoing off the rocks and trees in a chaotic, almost mocking symphony. I paused, trying to catch my breath. My camera hung uselessly around my neck, my hands shaking. The glowing eyes moved with deliberate coordination, surrounding me from all sides. It felt as if I had walked into a trap, an invisible cage constructed by the forest itself. Suddenly, one of the shadows lunged forward, not running, but gliding silently, impossibly fast. I stumbled backward, nearly falling off the edge of the cliff. The others followed, converging in a circle around me, their low growls blending with the unnatural howling. I realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't a predator in the conventional sense. It was something intelligent, calculating, and infinitely patient. And it had been hunting me the entire night. I knew I couldn't stay on the cliff. The shadows were too fast, too coordinated, and the howling now felt almost sentient, echoing through every tree and rock like a predator taunting its prey. My legs burned as I stumbled down the slope, slipping on wet moss and loose stones. The glowing eyes followed me relentlessly. Every time I glanced back, the figures were closer, though their movement was eerie, more gliding than running, as if gravity and time held no sway over them. My flashlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that danced among the trees, turning the forest into a living nightmare. I stumbled into a narrow gully, thinking it might offer a path to safety. But the howls intensified, They were louder now, almost deafening, and mixed with them were whispers. Voices I couldn't understand but felt were directing me somewhere. Then I realized the chilling truth. The shadows weren't just following me. They were guiding me towards something far worse. I stumbled out of the gully into a small clearing, my chest heaving and hands trembling. The moonlight revealed a sight I couldn't comprehend. In the center of the clearing was a massive stone formation, jagged and unnatural, like a monument erected by something not human. The shadows had stopped at its edges, their glowing eyes fixed on me. The howling had stopped too, replaced by a suffocating silence. I could feel it pressing against my skin, filling the clearing like a living fog. I took a hesitant step closer to the stones, and the whispers returned. They weren't just sounds now, they were words, ancient and unintelligible, yet somehow understood. My name echoed in them repeatedly. Mark, Mark. Every instinct told me to run, but I was frozen, paralyzed by the knowledge that I had been led here intentionally. Whatever this was, it had chosen this place, and I was the prey. I snapped out of my paralysis and bolted toward the edge of the clearing, heart pounding so violently I thought it would burst. The shadows surged after me, gliding silently over the moss and rocks. I could hear the whispers once more, frantic and overlapping. But now they were not just my name. They were commands, urging me toward the edge. I stumbled onto a narrow path leading down to a small inlet on the coast, icy water lapping against jagged rocks. The moonlight reflected off the waves, giving the mist an otherworldly glow. I glanced back once. The shadows had stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching almost patiently before they melted back into the forest like smoke. My lungs burned, but I ran until my legs gave out, finally reaching the coastline. I could feel the ocean breeze on my face and hear normal sounds again, the forest behind me eerily silent. I had escaped, but I knew the shadows were still out there. Waiting, I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, parked on a narrow dirt road miles from the clearing. I collapsed inside, shaking, heart hammering, and started the engine. The hum of the tires on the gravel felt surreal, almost comforting after the unnatural silence of the forest. Even as I drove away, the whispers haunted me. I would catch faint, almost imperceptible echoes in the wind. My name carried through the trees, blending with distant howls. I never returned to that part of Haida, Gwaii, and I no longer work alone in the field. The photographs and recordings I took that night show anomalies I still cannot explain. Shadows that aren't supposed to exist, and glowing eyes peering from misty trees. Evidence of something that shouldn't be, yet undeniably was. Some nights, when I close my eyes, I can still hear them. The intelligent, patient howling of the forest. And I know they are still out there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to enter their domain. My name is Clara Jensen, and this happened during a solo research trip to the west coast of Vancouver Island in 2020. I had always been fascinated by lighthouses and the stories surrounding them, so I arranged to stay at an old, abandoned lighthouse perched on a jagged cliff overlooking the Pacific. The place was rumored to be haunted, but I dismissed it as superstition. I wanted photographs of the rugged coastline and the crumbling structure. The first day was uneventful. Wind howled around the cliffs, waves crashed violently below, and seagulls circled overhead. I spent hours exploring the lighthouse interior, taking photos of the spiral staircases and the rusted lantern room. The isolation was thrilling, and I felt a strange sense of freedom far away from civilization. But as night fell, The wind grew colder, and an oppressive silence settled inside the lighthouse. It wasn't just quiet. It was unnatural. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, as if the building itself were holding its breath. And then, I heard the first knock. The knock came again, soft, deliberate, echoing through the hollow lighthouse. My heart leapt, and I froze, staring at the old wooden door that led to the lantern room. At first, I thought it might be the wind, but the sound was too precise, too rhythmic. I grabbed my flashlight and ascended the spiral staircase slowly, each creak underfoot amplified in the silence. The higher I climbed, the stronger the chill became. By the time I reached the top, the lantern room, I could feel it. An almost tangible presence, like eyes watching me from the corners. The glass panes were fogged from the cold, but faint shapes appeared outside, moving along the cliff's edge. Shadows danced across the walls, cast by the weak beam of my flashlight and the moonlight beyond. Then I noticed the logbook on the table. It had been closed when I arrived, but now it lay open, with a new entry written in a jagged, unfamiliar hand. "You shouldn't be here." I stared at the logbook in disbelief, my hands shaking. Who could have written that? I was alone. I had locked the lighthouse door behind me, and the cliffs were inaccessible in the dark. Yet the words were unmistakable, fresh, ink still glistening under the moonlight. A sudden gust of wind slammed the lantern room door shut with a deafening bang, making me jump. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch unnaturally, curling toward me like smoke. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief darkness, I thought I saw a figure, tall, cloaked in black, standing just beyond the glass panes, watching silently. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the fog, the reflection of the waves, or exhaustion. But then I heard it, a soft whisper right behind me. "Clara." The voice was low, deliberate and icy. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, but the room was empty, the air still and suffocating. I knew I wasn't alone. I backed toward the stairs, keeping my eyes on the corners of the room. The shadows seemed to pulse, almost alive, and the whisper repeated, softer this time. "Why are you here?" The logbook lay open on the table, pages turning slowly, as if blown by an invisible hand. My heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the door to the spiral staircase was now jammed. I pushed and pulled in vain. It wouldn't budge. I shone my flashlight across the room again. The figure I had glimpsed outside the panes had vanished, replaced by a dark stain that spread across the wall like ink. The chill in the air deepened, frost forming along the edges of the glass. And then, the knocking returned, louder this time, pounding against the metal of the lantern room railing. It wasn't just outside now. It was all around me, reverberating through the walls of the lighthouse. Something was coming. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to calm my racing heart. The knocking had stopped for a moment, leaving only an eerie silence, thick and suffocating. My flashlight flickered, and I could feel the temperature drop sharply, frost forming along my jacket and the railings. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but the spiral staircase was still jammed. Then I noticed something moving in the corner of the room. A shadow detached itself from the wall, tall and humanoid, but impossibly thin, its limbs stretching unnaturally as it glided toward me. The whispers returned, now insistent and mocking, echoing my own thoughts. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." I swung the flashlight at it, but the beam passed through the figure like it was made of mist. It drifted closer, and I could feel its presence pressing against my skin, cold and heavy. I realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't just haunting the lighthouse. It was the lighthouse. I tore my eyes from the shadow and tried the logbook again. The pages flipped on their own, stopping at a new entry written in jagged letters. "Leave before the night devours you." I swallowed hard, realizing the words weren't a warning, they were a command. My stomach churned with terror as the temperature plummeted further, my breath visible in clouds. The shadows in the corners seemed to multiply, filling the room like dark smoke. I finally managed to force the spiral staircase door open just a crack and peered down. The steps twisted impossibly, longer than they should have been, spiraling into blackness that seemed to go on forever. With no other choice, I took a deep breath and began my descent. Each step echoed unnaturally, the whispers growing louder, circling me, mocking my fear. I could feel unseen hands brushing my arms, and the shadows stretched higher, pressing toward me from every angle. I knew that leaving this lighthouse alive would demand everything I had. Each step down the spiral staircase felt endless. The walls seemed to warp, twisting around me as if alive. The shadows grew denser, closing in from all sides. I could hear whispers in multiple tones now, mocking, commanding, desperate, all overlapping in a cacophony that rattled my mind. Suddenly, one of the shadows lunged across the staircase, gliding through the air without touching the steps. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance, my flashlight beam catching the figure for a brief second. Tall, faceless, its limbs unnaturally long, bending in impossible angles. I screamed, the sound swallowed instantly by the oppressive air. The wind outside the lighthouse intensified, rattling the windows and echoing with waves crashing against the cliffs below. The whispers repeated one final phrase as I pressed onward. "You cannot leave. Not yet." Panic surged through me, but I refused to stop. Every fiber of my being screamed to escape. My only path was down into the darkness, toward whatever awaited at the bottom. Finally, the staircase opened into the lighthouse foyer. The wind howled through broken windows, carrying the scent of salt and decay. Shadows stretched across the floor, moving like living ink, reaching toward me with tendrils that seemed to grow from the walls themselves. I bolted for the exit, yanking open the heavy door and stepping onto the cliffside path. The ocean roared below, waves smashing against jagged rocks. The lighthouse loomed behind me, its silhouette almost sentient, and I could feel its gaze following my every move. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a low, vibrating hum that seemed to rise from the stones beneath my feet. I glanced back once. Figures in the lantern room, impossibly tall and thin, watching. I ran down the cliff path, slipping and sliding over wet moss, feeling the oppressive presence of the lighthouse trying to pull me back. Every instinct told me to keep moving, to survive, and to never return. I had made it outside. But the lighthouse wasn't finished with me. I didn't stop running until I reached the gravel road that led to the nearest village. My legs burned and my lungs ached, but I dared not slow down. The lighthouse remained behind me, perched atop the cliff like a dark sentinel, its silhouette sharp against the moonlit sky. Even as the wind carried the faint sound of the ocean, I felt the oppressive presence of the lighthouse lingering in my mind. The hum, the whispers, and the shadows weren't gone. They had followed me, leaving an invisible mark that made my skin crawl and my thoughts fray. When I finally reached the village, the locals were sympathetic but dismissive, claiming old lighthouses are haunted by ghost stories and lonely nights. I wanted to tell them what I had experienced, but the words sounded hollow even to me. I knew the truth. Whatever had claimed that lighthouse was intelligent, patient, and ancient. It had allowed me to escape. For now, even months later, the experience haunts me. I can still feel the whispers in the wind, especially on quiet nights when the ocean roars against the cliffs. My photographs from that night show anomalies I cannot explain. Dark, elongated shadows in corners of rooms, figures that vanish when examined closely, and faint glimmers of glowing eyes in the lantern room. I've avoided lighthouses ever since, but the memory of that night has changed me. I know now that some places are alive, watching, waiting. They do not forget. They are patient. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can hear the hum rising again, echoing from somewhere deep inside the cliffside lighthouse. I can almost feel the fingers of shadow reaching for me, reminding me that escape was temporary and that the lighthouse still owns the night. If you ever find yourself on Vancouver Island, isolated and alone, beware the cliffs. Some structures are more than stone and metal. They are predators, and the night is theirs. My name is Ethan Ramirez, and this happened during a summer camping trip in Carmanah Valley, British Columbia, in 2018. I had joined a group of 4 friends to explore the remote rainforest, famous for its towering old-growth trees and the haunting beauty of its misty trails. The valley is so isolated that cell service disappears after the first few kilometers, leaving you entirely at the mercy of the wilderness. I was excited. An adventure into untouched nature, away from the chaos of city life. The first day was serene, with sunlight filtering through the dense canopy, birds calling from unseen perches, and the distant roar of waterfalls echoing through the valley. We set up camp near a riverbank, laughing and sharing stories around the fire. The air was cool and fresh, the scent of moss and pine intoxicating. But as night fell, a strange unease settled over the forest. The usual sounds of the nocturnal wildlife were absent, replaced by a low, persistent rustling that seemed to follow us. And then, the first scream shattered the night. I froze, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. One of my friends, Lucas, had vanished. One moment he was there, laughing, and the next, nothing. The rustling intensified, like footsteps moving in rhythm with the forest itself. Yet no one else appeared. Panic surged through our small group. We called out, shining flashlights into the black void between the trees. But there was no response. Only the sound of something large moving quickly, brushing against trunks and leaves, and the faint echo of laughter that wasn't Lucas's. I grabbed my camera to document the area, hoping to find some clue, but the display only showed darkness, as if the forest had absorbed all light. The river beside our camp reflected nothing but the fog and the shadows of the trees. Yet I could swear I saw faint figures just beyond the water's edge. By then, fear had taken full control. Something was hunting us, and it had already claimed its first victim. We huddled together, our flashlights darting across the dense undergrowth. Every rustle of leaves made our hearts leap, and the forest seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. I could hear faint whispers, though no one spoke. Words too soft to understand, yet insistent enough to chill me to the bone. We decided to split into pairs to search for Lucas, but even as we moved cautiously, I noticed the forest was changing. The trees seemed closer, the mist thicker, almost solid. Every path we took appeared to loop back on itself, as if the forest itself was rearranging to trap us. Then I heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from a direction no human or animal should be. It was accompanied by the unmistakable sound of snapping twigs and shifting underbrush, moving toward us with a deliberate pace. Something was stalking us, and the realization hit like ice. The forest wasn't just hiding Lucas. It was hunting all of us. Screams pierced the darkness again. One of my friends, Mia, was gone. Vanished in an instant, leaving only her flashlight rolling on the ground, flickering. The remaining two of us froze, paralyzed with terror, as the forest seemed to close in. Every shadow appeared to twist, elongate, and move toward us with intent. I tried calling out, but my voice sounded small and fragile against the oppressive silence of the valley. The whispers returned, circling me, repeating my name in tones both mocking and threatening. Ethan. Ethan. I grabbed my remaining friends, insisting we run toward the river, hoping the open space might give us some advantage. The fog became almost tangible, clinging to our skin, obscuring vision, and the trees appeared impossibly dense, blocking any path. As we ran blindly, I glimpsed something moving in the corner of my eye. A massive, shadowy form gliding silently between the trees, far too fast to be human, far too deliberate to be an animal. We were not alone. We stumbled into a small clearing, hearts pounding, lungs burning. The mist was thick, wrapping around our legs and making every step a struggle. I could hear the river nearby, its roar a faint comfort. Yet the oppressive silence of the forest pressed in from every direction. Suddenly, the shadow appeared again. Massive, humanoid, but wrong in every proportion, its glowing eyes fixed on us. It moved effortlessly between the trees, gliding closer, and I could feel the temperature drop as it approached. The whispers returned, this time unmistakable, almost human, repeating, "You cannot leave. You cannot leave." I grabbed the flashlight and then swung it toward the figure. It vanished instantly, leaving only the echo of its presence. Panic took over completely. I grabbed my friend Noah's hand, and we sprinted blindly toward the river, hoping the open water would provide some safety. The forest seemed endless, stretching farther than it should have, twisting around us. Every turn brought new shadows. Every rustle of leaves felt like something massive closing in. We reached the riverbank, soaked from running through wet moss, hearts hammering. For a brief moment, the forest seemed to retreat, as if it were testing us, watching from the shadows. The whispers persisted, low and urgent, echoing off the cliffs. "You shouldn't have come." I tried to find a safe path along the river, hoping it would lead to the old logging trail we had used earlier. But the river's edge was treacherous, lined with jagged rocks and sudden drops. Every step felt like it could be my last. Then I saw movement upstream. Dark figures slipping through the mist, their limbs unnaturally long, gliding over the river rocks as if weightless. Noah screamed, and I grabbed him, pulling him forward. The shadows didn't follow immediately, but I could feel their presence behind us, patient, calculating. It was clear. The forest was alive, and we were intruders in its domain. Survival meant escaping its grasp entirely, or not at all. We followed the river, slipping on wet stones, trying to keep our footing and avoid falling into the icy water. The mist clung to our clothes, our hair, and our skin, chilling us to the bone. Every time I glanced behind, I could feel the eyes of the forest on us, watching, calculating, patient. Suddenly, Noah tripped on a hidden root, tumbling into the river. I reached for him, but the current was stronger than I realized. Something in the mist grabbed his arm. Not the water, but a shadow. He screamed as the figure dragged him beneath the trees, and then he vanished. I fell to my knees, gasping and shaking, realizing the forest wasn't just hunting, it was separating us, taking one at a time. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. But there was none. The whispers returned louder, more insistent, repeating my name and laughing in tones that made my skin crawl. I had no choice but to run. Alone, I ran blindly, guided only by the faint light of the moon reflecting on the river. The forest seemed endless, twisting and reshaping itself, branches snagging at my clothes and clawing at my skin. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, felt amplified, a symphony of predation. The shadows followed, moving effortlessly, gliding over obstacles, never tiring. Occasionally, I would glimpse glimpses of distorted forms, elongated limbs, glowing eyes, and faces that defied recognition. The whispers taunted me with every step, repeating phrases I didn't understand, yet instinctively feared. Finally, I spotted a faint trail leading uphill, remnants of the path we had come in on. Desperate, I sprinted toward it, stumbling over roots and rocks, feeling the shadows close in with every second. By the time I reached higher ground, gasping and bleeding from scrapes, I dared to glance back. The mist was thick, but I could see movement. Figures, far too numerous, watching me from the trees, waiting. I had survived, but barely. I finally emerged from the dense forest onto an old logging trail, breathless, soaked, and trembling. The moonlight offered a weak sense of safety, but I knew the forest was still watching. The whispers had faded, replaced by silence that was heavier than any sound. I stopped to gather myself, leaning against a moss-covered tree, and realized I was completely alone. Lucas, Mia, Noah. They were gone, swallowed by the forest without a trace. I called their names, my voice echoing futilely through the trees. But there was no answer. Only the distant sound of the river rushing past, indifferent to the horror that had unfolded. I kept walking along the trail, every nerve on edge, half expecting the shadows to return. Even as I neared the point where we had parked our vehicle, I could feel the presence of the forest lingering, patient, intelligent, like it had marked me. I had escaped Carmanah Valley that night, but the memory of the forest still haunts me. Its darkness, its whispers, and its victims left behind. I returned to civilization physically unharmed, but the experience changed me forever. Nights are the hardest. When I close my eyes, I see the shadows between the trees, the distorted humanoid figures moving with impossible grace, and the glowing eyes that follow me wherever I go. The whispers sometimes visit, faint but unmistakable. My name carried on the wind, teasing, warning, reminding me that the forest is patient. I've told my story to friends and locals, but few believe it. They dismiss it as a panic-stricken imagination, a cautionary tale for naive campers. But I know the truth. The forest is alive. It watches, waits, and claims those who wander too deep. I never camp alone again. I avoid Carmanah Valley entirely. And even now, I am haunted by the thought that the forest may still be out there, counting, watching for the next group foolish enough to enter. I survived, but not without cost.